This week's Parsha is so full of so much stuff that it's like an incredible story that happens in it. And it starts with, it's called Parshas Toldot, which means the children. It's talking about the children of Yitzchak. It says, these are the children, Ela Toldos, the children, the progeny of Yitzchak. Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. Abraham had Yitzchak. And the question is, why is it saying, these are the children of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham? Abraham had Yitzchak. Like, obviously, if it's Yitzchak, the son of Abraham, obviously Abraham had Yitzchak. Why does it repeat that? And the commentaries explain that the reason was because God made, Yitzchak was born miraculously, right? He was born miraculously as Sarah was barren for so many years. And it was soon after he was, that Sarah was taken into Paro's palace, his castle, and he wanted to take her forcibly. He did take her forcibly, even though she was married to Abraham. But Pharaoh could not touch her. The angels came every time he wanted to come close to her. The angels came and they hit him. So he couldn't touch her. He couldn't do anything to her. But when she was released, people would say, oh, like soon after that, she got pregnant with Yitzchak. It must be that it was Pharaoh's son. Not. So God made a miracle that Yitzchak looked just like Abraham. His face looked just like Abraham. Now you're going to say, okay, that's nice, but why is that a miracle? Like, how many of you have children that people tell you, oh, the children look exactly like it? Okay, there we have it. So how is that a miracle? Like, it often is that children look exactly like their parents. But the commentaries explain that, when you look into a face, there's so much that you see in a face. You can actually see like characteristics of the person. And people are actually trained to look in faces and be able to see qualities. And very often we see it. Like you look into someone's eye, oh, their eyes are kind. Or, oh, their eyes are hard, like I don't trust them. Or like we look at people, or you look at their smile, and that's not a real smile. That's a false smile, right? You see characters of people in their faces. So the commentaries say that Abraham and Isaac, Avraham and Yitzchak were so different in personality. Avraham was the ultimate charmer, this extrovert, always like out there, inviting people, teaching people, this very charming, charismatic individual who taught the world and changed the world into this monotheistic approach to godliness. Yitzchak was the exact opposite. He was the introvert. He was somebody who was more digging deep within, not going outwards to other people. He was like a master of discipline, a master of restraint. And in fact, in this week's Torah portion, we have about Yitzchak digging wells. And, we know so much about Abraham. There's like so many parshiot about him. There's so much about Yaakov, Jacob later on, and about his children and all that. And there's just this one little bit about Yitzchak, and even this little parsha that we have. I mean, last week Sarah dies, and Yitzchak was taken to the Akedah, but we don't really see a lot about Yitzchak. And Yitzchak actually lived for 180 years, even longer than Abraham. Abraham lived 175 years. So, but there's so little about him. But what we do see about him in this week's Torah portion is the fact that he dug wells. And at the time, wells were important because the way that this is how you thrived with a well. You dug a well and you owned a well. This was a source of water, or a source of nutrients for your flock, for produce, for so many things that it was needed for. But the fact that the Torah tells us so much about that he was digging wells tells us more. It's not just, the Torah isn't just a book of history, but it's talking about his personality, that he was somebody who digs deep within himself. That's his personality. So Abraham was a personality that was very different than that. He was just this outward person. Yitzchak is very much this inward person. So the miracle was someone that was a son of Abraham looked just like him. When he was so different in characteristic, he represented something completely different. While Abraham represented chesed, giving, Yitzchak represented gvura, withholding, digging within, looking within. And that's what the miracle was. But what we learn from this all, of course, is that these are the patriarchs of the Jewish people. This is the founders of the Jewish people. We sometimes think, you have to be a certain way. To be a religious person, you have to be a certain way. There's observant people, they're a certain way, certain character, certain in the boxness, right? And the Torah is telling us, no. With Torah, with Judaism, you can find your way. You can be who you are. You can be your unique self. The very fathers of our nation, the founders of our nation, look how they were completely opposite. Avram and Yitzchak were so different in personality. You can find what's unique about yourself and what's unique about your way of doing things and use it in Judaism. And I think we're seeing that so nicely nowadays, really. Unfortunately, the massacre has brought out so much kindness in people, so much goodness in people, but everyone in their own way. So you have the people who are at the forefront, the soldiers who are valiantly fighting to protect us. Then you have the people here who are raising the money for the tefillin and sending it over to them. That's another forefront. And then you have all of us with our forefront sitting here and saying our Tehillim, saying our psalms, lighting the Shabbat candles, everyone in their own way. And then, of course, you have the people in Israel, the display. There's so many fronts that you can be fighting in this war, this spiritual war, this physical war, this horrific war that we're in. But never think there's not a place for me. There's not a place for my character. There's not a place for my qualities. I'm an introvert. I can't have 1,000 people at my Shabbos table or even 5 people at my Shabbos table, so it's not for me. That's okay. So Shabbos is not somewhere where you can invite five people. You can do your own thing. You can do your thing that you're good at. Judaism is full of that. And that's what is the message here in having the fathers of our nation be so different, so very different in character, to teach us that Judaism is not, it's not that you have to be a certain box, and if you're a circle, you don't fit into that box, right? It's not the way it is. You be who you are, and you'll find your own niche in the way that you find it. And there was really a lovely story this week, which has to do with the second part of this parsha, which is, okay, so we see that Yitzchak is married. He's married to Rivka. We knew that from last week's Torah portion. And then he doesn't have children. They don't have children for many, many years. 20 years they're waiting for children. And the Torah describes how they decided to pray. They're both praying to God because they just so much want children. And Yitzchak realizes that Rivka's barren. He needs a miracle. There's no way that she can actually have children unless there's a miracle. And so they're standing on opposite ends of the room, and they're just praying and praying and praying. And the word in Hebrew is vaye'atar, and they were just praying to God. And the word, the Midrash says, is also a form of the word for a pitchfork that you use in the field. And it teaches us that what is prayer? Prayer is like when you turn over, just like a pitchfork takes the ground and turns it over. That's what prayer does. It turns over the decree. It turns over what is supposed to be the badness, the bad things that are supposed to happen. It turns it over and makes it good. And that's the power of prayer. We see that this was a miracle, that God answered their prayers, and after so many, many years, they're actually answered, and they have children. And it says that Yitzchak would pray on one side of the room and Rivka would pray on the other, and they're pleading and pleading and pleading to God to listen. And it says Yitzchak would pray that God will listen to them in the merit of his wife Rivka. And Rivka, it says, would pray that God will listen to them in the merit of her husband, Yitzchak. And it says that God answered Yitzchak's prayer. So that means God answered his prayer, that Rivka, and it was in her merit that she would have a child, that they would have a child. So this is the prayers that we do. And the word for prayer, as we said, is the word lehit palel, to pray, lehit palel, right? And this is something that's hifil. It's something that you do to yourself. Just like when we talk about getting dressed, it's called lehit labesh. You dress yourself. These are things that you do to yourself. And the point of prayer really is to change your perspective, to cause a change in yourself. It's not only that you're praying to God. It's not only that you're asking God to listen to you, which of course we are. But when you are praying, you're creating a change in yourself. You're doing something that changes yourself. You're introducing a new understanding to your life. Wow. And what is that new understanding? You're realizing that it's not people who have control over us. It's not circumstances that have control over us. It's not whatever happens will happen. It's God who's running the world. And when we realize that, when we have that realization that it's God who's running the world and God is good and God will do good for us, when we can come to that understanding, then we actually merit to have the things that we prayed for. So how does prayer help? In a sense, it helps obviously because God listens to us like a father listens to children, but it's also because we changed. We've become a different person. We've become a person who realizes that the only thing that there is in this world that is true is God. And therefore God is listening to us. It's not nature that's causing this situation. It's not circumstances that are causing this situation. It's not this person who's being mean to me that's causing this situation. It's all in God's hands. And God can change it, like we say, like the blink of an eye, Geharafayin. He can change the circumstances. He can make it just evaporate like that. And then when we come to that realization, we can then deserve for that miracle to actually happen. So that's what prayer does. This vaye'atar, he was like a pitchfork. He was putting it in the ground, trying to overturn the decree that was decreed on them that Rivka should be barren, and that their prayers were actually answered. This week I heard that there was troops, there was like a battalion that was going into Gaza, and they had just come back for a little bit and they were going to go back in, and their commander of the commander of the army was there, and he had just gotten bad news that the group that was already in there were by the Shifa hospital, and it was bad because they were surrounded by a lot of terrorists. Like, it was really, really bad. And he's about to, like, he's sending them in for reinforcement, but he's saying the situation is really bad. And he sees amongst this group that he's sending back, there was one religious boy, and he pulls him aside. The commander was not religious. He pulls aside this guy and he says, "You know what I need you now for? I need you to go and pray. Go out and pray. That's what we need, prayers now, because the situation looks pretty hopeless." And the soldier goes out of the room to pray, and he's praying, and he says he didn't even feel like, sometimes, you pray and you feel like it's really touching, like it's a really good prayer. You feel like, I did it. I really, like, he says he wasn't, like, it's hard sometimes. You don't feel it. He says, I prayed to the best of my ability, but I didn't really feel like I just, did the best that I could. I just did what I could at that moment. And he came back in a few minutes later, and the officer says, the situation has completely improved. Yeah. And they got it. And the officer says, and now I'm sending the guys in, but guess what? You're staying here. I'm going to need you to pray. And this just goes back to what we were saying. Like, there's squares, there's circles, there's triangles. We all fit in the Jewish people. There's the Abraham, there's the Isaac, there's the Jacob, there's the 12 tribes. There's so many different ways that we can contribute to the Jewish people, each in their own way. We all just need to be doing something. In our own way, just do something good. Just make more light in this world, because we each have that ability. And each in our own way, in our own unique way. And the way that you do it is not the way that I do it. Even the same mitzvah that we do, even the same thing as lighting candles. You might do it differently. We might be doing the same act, but we're thinking something different, and our intentions are different. And that's what it's all about. That's the beauty and the kaleidoscope of the Jewish people. So just the prayers that I felt were so important, like the Rivka and Yitzchak, like you just imagine them in different corners of the room, each praying for the other, that God should listen in the merit of the other, and then God listens in the merit, listens to Yitzchak, which is in the merit of his wife, and they then have a child. Rivka then gets pregnant. not a child, but actually 2 children. So she gets pregnant, and it says, "Vayisraitzu habanim bikirbo." She's pregnant, and there's this struggle within her. She's pregnant, and she feels this struggle within her, and she doesn't understand what is going on. It says when she passed a house of idol worship, one of them feels like it's trying to get out. When she passed a house of spirituality, a yeshiva, one of shame and aver, one of them tries to get out. She's like very confused. On the one hand, there seems to be a lot of immorality, and on the other hand, there seems to be very much morality. What is going on? And there's a lot of pain that she's experiencing within herself. And then she decides she's going to ask Shem, which is the child of Noah. She's going to go to that yeshiva to see if he was a Navi, he was a prophet. Can he help her? Can he give her some clarity? Can he give her some clarity about what's going on within her? And he tells her that there are 2 nations within you. There's two children within you. Not only 2 children, not only twins within you, but these 2 twins are actually 2 different nations. And there's going to be this fighting between them. There's going to be this struggle between them. And one is going to have an inclination for the negative, and one is going to have an inclination for the positive. This is going to be what their destiny is. They're inside of you. And it says she left with a certain clarity. So often we have this in our own selves. We have this. It feels very unclear when we don't understand our motives. Sometimes we look at ourselves and we say, oh, like, I'm a pretty good person. I'm doing all this good stuff. And then the next moment we look at ourselves and we say, I'm a pretty horrible person. Look at all the horrible things I do. And we almost think that because I did all these horrible things, that all the good things that I did are nothing. They're not real. That's not the real me. Because look, if I can do these terrible things, then obviously the good things that I did, they don't count. They're not worth anything. And that's the clarity that she got. We have to get that clarity. The clarity is that there's 2 parts within each of us. And this is really, if any of you learned any of the book of Tanya from the first Chabad Rebbe Shneur Zalman of Liadi, it's a book all about ourselves, our psyche, who we are, what we are. And the basis of the book is that we have these 2 parts within ourselves, this godly part and this animalistic part. And the godly part, only two. Each of the 2 have a lot of other parts. Well, if you know the internal family system, we have all these parts, right? IFS.
There are 9 intelligences.
Huh?
There are 9 intelligences.
Intelligence.
There used to be 7, and they came up with 2 more.
2 more. But intelligence is part of, there's the intelligence of the animal soul and there's the intelligence of the divine soul. There's both. Both of them have there's the emotions of the animal soul, there's the emotions of the spirituals, the godly soul. So there's a lot of different parts, in other words, but there's these 2 main parts, 2 main souls that we have, 2 main motivations that we have inside of us. And the animalistic soul is not something bad. It just wants our self-preservation. It wants our animalistic self to be comfortable. It wants to make sure that things are the way that we are comfortable with. It looks after our material needs. It takes care of our bodies. It takes care of our functioning. It takes care of that me, that ego, that me needing. Not always bad. We need that, right? And then there's this spiritual self. And this godly self is very transcendent. It's the opposite of the animalistic self. It's transcendent. There's no ego. It wants to soar, to do all these good things. And there has to be a balance between the 2, right? We have to function in tandem. We have to function one with the other. Because we're not supposed to just forget about this world and just forget about our physical needs, because then we won't be here. We won't be physical beings. But on the other hand, we need to infuse our physical life with the spiritual. So as long as we can realize that there are these 2 parts of us, we can understand that when we are doing something really great, and you're so surpassing your ego, and you're not taking your ego into account, and you're just doing something so selflessly for another person, that's amazing. And even if in the next moment or the next day, you're very selfish and you're taking care of yourself and you're stepping on everybody else's toes, that doesn't invalidate the other times. These are two parts of yourself, kind of like a schizophrenic kind of part of yourself. But these are two parts of yourself, and one doesn't invalidate the other, and that's important to realize. And that's the clarity that Rivka got. She got the clarity of understanding that there was these two opposite forces within her, each trying to exert themselves and to have power over the other one. So that's
shame on Shem.
shame on
You
Shem.
tell a pregnant woman all this. He was a god. Imagine she came home and she's like, I need a compliment.
He's a god. What are you?
He's a guy.
He's a still man.
And that's the funny part. Like, you would think like she wouldn't feel that good about it, but so she felt like very, very happy because she had this gift of clarity. There's nothing like a gift of clarity. Like, sometimes you know that there's so many, like if any of you learned in IFS, that therapy where there's so many different parts. It talks about all the different parts of you. Someone is familiar with it.
I'm a therapist.
Oh, okay, there you go. So you want to tell us a little about it?
Like that we're made up of parts.
Yeah. And as long as, and it's okay to know that, but like it labels the parts, right? If I understand it correctly?
Yeah, we have parts, but then there are, there's our soul, which would be considered like that part of us that's untouchable. But
Right.
then parts develop in response to life, in response to survival, in response to things that happen, in response to, but there is a core self that's untouchable, which I guess you would say is your godly
Soul, right. But these other parts try to interfere. Like, in other words, I might have a part of me that was scared in my childhood. So when a certain situation happens, I'll have to try to protect it. And the fact that you understand what's going on, okay, this is just my part that's trying to protect, what happened to me when I was a child. So therefore, I'm acting out. In other words,
rather than having extreme anxiety about
right,
what's happening.
exactly.
When you understand it, then you understand yourself.
Exactly. So just sometimes even labeling, we tell children, label your feelings, label. We help children label what they're feeling, their emotions, because it kind of calms them. Okay, so right now you're feeling upset about that, or right now you're feeling angry because the person took your toy. We're labeling what they're feeling. It kind of makes it a little easier. So that's what shame was doing.
I'm feeling frustrated.
Right.
Right.
I'm a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm feeling frustrated.
Right, exactly.
I'm feeling angry. It's funny when you hear kids really talking about emotions.
They're
They're
learning.
learning.
That's very true.
At a young age, they're teaching them now how to regulate their systems.
Right.
And it's incredible. It's
Incredible.
Just to see the evolution of it.
Yeah.
Kids understand it.
Holocaust survivors. I mean,
So-
one never asked me how I was feeling.
Exactly.
I mean, we didn't have an opportunity to discuss feelings.
Right.
In the cards.
Right.
And now it's completely the other way. It's only are you hungry?
That's
That was
right.
the only feeling she cared about.
Right. That's true. Very true. So that's where we see. So it started here with shame. He taught us how to do it.
How old was she at this point? Because he was, around from the flood times.
He was very, yeah.
Right after, so how old was this guy? How
That's a
old?
good question. I have
He
to,
had to be pretty
very old, yeah. But it says he had a yeshiva. So he was
Right.
teaching, it was a Shiva Shame Aver.
Right,
So
his
he,
grandson.
yeah.
Was his grandson? Noah's grandson.
That was him.
yeah.
Shame, and then Noah's son Shame, and then it was Aver who was the Shame's son, right?
I'm not
No.
sure. We have to look that up, yeah.
Gotcha on that one.
You did. But yeah, I was thinking the same thing as I'm saying it, oh wow, he must have been really old, right? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so she's pregnant, she's having this feeling of these two children struggling within her, and then the two of them are born, Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and Esav. And when we look at Jacob and Esau, we see, again, we can look at it on so many different levels. You know, you could look at it as, on a simple level, the Jewish people, which is the voice of, it says, Hakol Kol Yaakov, the voice of Jacob, Hayadayim Yedei Esau, the hands of Esau, where we've experienced this throughout the generations. It was the voice of Jacob calling out to God. We know even though our soldiers are working so hard and are protecting us, it's the voice of Jacob that is calling out. We're doing the work that we need to do. We're doing the effort that we need to do. We can't just sit back and say, God, take care of it. We do our effort, but it's really our voices calling out to God that's helping them. And so many soldiers have said this. You know, I mean, we were talking, I think last week, how the commanders were saying it was going on, this WhatsApp, how they're going into Gaza. The hardest fighting that's that's happening in Gaza is in the middle of the night there, which is like around 9 o'clock our time, like between 7 and 9 or 10 our time. And they were saying this is the time in Israel. It's like in the middle of the night. It's like 3, 4 in the morning. So there's not a lot of prayers going on then, but can we, this was the request from the officers, can we hear from the commanders, can we hear pray for them, because all the Jewish people are one nation, because this is the time that they need our prayers so much. Can we say, and I don't know, groups of Tehillim are going around, you know, rolling Tehillim for people to just say an extra kapitel, say an extra psalm at that time, because this is the most dangerous time. They need our prayers. And they feel it. So many times they said, we felt your prayers. We were there and we felt your prayers. Miracles happened in unbelievable ways. So, how did I just get there? Oh, so the voice of Jacob, that's the voice of Jacob and the hands of Esau. So we felt it. We felt it with all the nations against us. There was the Egyptians, there were the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans. We've had it. We've had their hands on us and in the exiles that we suffered. This is all the Esau from the past. So we can look at Yaakov and Esau in that way. We can look at Yaakov and Esau in terms of material and spiritual. You know, this battle for materiality, this battle for physicality versus the battle for spirituality. We can look at the Esau within ourselves. Every day, there's the part of us that goes out to work and battles the material world, and there's the part of us that looks for the transcendent, that looks for the prayer, that looks for the spiritual. These are the two parts within us. We can look at them as the battle between what we just said, the animalistic soul and the spiritual soul. So there's many ways that we look at this struggling and the tension that is so evident in this week's Torah portion between Esau and Yaakov. And then, of course, we come to the blessings where we say Rivka loved Yaakov and Yitzchak loved Esau. And what was going on there? Like, what was going on? Yitzchak gets old. He's about to bless his children. And he calls for Esau, who, by the way, sold the birthright when it says that when Avraham passed away when he was younger. We said Avraham passed away when he was 175 versus Yitzchak at 180, in order to be spared, seeing Esau, who was now starting to really be this horrible teenager in doing all these kind of immoral activities. So Avram was saved and being taken earlier, so he shouldn't see that. And it was the day that Avraham passed away that Yaakov was cooking up this pot of lentils, and Esau was on it says that day he committed 3 sins, 3 cardinal sins. He killed, he raped, and he did avodah zarah. He did idolatry. So he came in and he's like pretty tired, because I guess those sins take a lot of effort. And he's like, I'm ready now, I'm famished, you know. And what are you cooking? Just pour it into my mouth. I'm so thirsty. The red stuff. Yeah. And that was when Yaakov says, well, I'll give it to you. See, Yaakov had some street smarts. He says, I'll give it to you if you sell me the birthright. And Esau's like, what do I need this birthright for? What is the birthright? And Yaakov explains, well, in the Jewish nation, the birthright used to be before Kohanim were Kohanim, before the sin of the Egel, of the golden calf, it used to be that the oldest was really the function of a Kohen. The Kohen would do the service in the temple. He would do the sacrifices and he would do the spiritual service. And Esau's like, what do I need that for? You know, and he gladly sold him the birthright. So it comes to this point where Yitzchak is getting old and he's ready to bless his children, his sons, and he's ready to give the blessings to Esau. And that's to his oldest one, to the one who's the oldest, even though he didn't realize that he had sold the birthright. And it was Rivka who says, oh no, I'm not going to let that happen, right? Woman to the rescue. And she's like, no. So she calls Yaakov and she says, get dressed up in the clothing of Esau and go to your father and put on the hairy clothing, these goat skins, so you'll feel hairy, because Esau was very hairy, and go to your father and tell him that you're Esau, so he'll give you the blessings. And he does that, and Yitzchak couldn't see. He was already old. He was blind. And Yitzchak says, who are you? And he says, I am Esav B'chorcha. Esav is your firstborn. But it sounds like I am Esav, your firstborn. And that was when he says, it sounds like my Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esav. The hands are all hairy, but the voice is the voice of Yaakov. But nevertheless, he gives him the blessing. He gives him the blessing of all the material prosperity, and you should rule over your brother, and you should be on top of him. And then Esav comes in, and he sees Yaakov is gone, and he goes in, he's ready to, prepares a big meal for his father, and he tells him, okay, Dad, I prepared this big meal. You asked me to prepare you a big meal. I went out, I hunted, I got you this big meal, and now I want my blessing. And that's when Yitzchak realizes, he says, I already gave it to him. I already gave it to your brother. And that's when Esau realizes his brother played a trick on him and got the blessings. And the question is, why did it have to happen in this way? Why couldn't Rivka just talk to Yitzchak about her perspective of the two boys? She had obviously a mother's understanding of what the two boys were like. Why couldn't she explain that to Yitzchak? So when we understand what was the perspective of Yitzchak and Rivka, Yitzchak's view was, we need somebody who is going to be very smart in the street. He's very street smart, very PR savvy, who knows how to do hunting, who knows how to get people. And unfortunately, our PR game is still pretty bad. I mean, we see with Israel what's going on, right? We're still not too great at it. He says, in order to teach godliness to the world, we need somebody who's really in the world, a real materialist, someone who's very physical, someone who's really working with the world. Not this guy who's this spiritual person who sits in the tent and learns all day. We need somebody who's really with it, who's really PR savvy, who really has hunting in his mouth. And this is the guy that I want to give the blessing to, so he can work hand in hand with Yaakov, but he's going to be the guy who's on top of it. And Rivka realized, no, you can't do that, because if Esav has that power, he's not going to work with Yaakov. He's going to take the material blessing and use it for himself, not use it for the world. So he's not going to use that material blessing. A materialist is not somebody who's going to use material reality for good, but a spiritual person is somebody who's going to know how to use the physical for the sake of something good. She says, I saw this in my home. I saw this in my home because my brother was a cheat, my father was a cheat. They were all swindlers. And I know what it's going to be like. So Esav is not going to use this high potential that he had. And it says that his soul was from a very high level. But he's not using that potential for goodness. And therefore, Yaakov has to be the one. So how did she do that? She does that by a very smart way. She has Yaakov dress up in the clothes of Esav. In other words, he comes to his father and he shows his father that, you know what? I also know how to use the methods of this world. I also know how to cheat when need be. I also know how to use the PR techniques of the world to make things fake and to change things around. When I need to do it for a good cause, I also know how to do it. And that was why when Esav finally came back to Yaakov, to Yitzchak, Yitzchak says, Gam Baruch Yehiyah, I gave your brother the blessing, but he should be blessed. Instead of cursing him and saying, oh, I gave him the blessing, I gave it to the wrong person, oh, I take it all back, he should be cursed. No, he says, Gam Baruch Yehiyah, I gave it to him and he should be blessed. Because now Yitzchak realizes that Yaakov has that power, that Rivka was trying to teach him how to use to be naive and to be, not naive, but tamim, very innocent, thank you, very innocent, to use his innocence, but at the same time know how to use the suaveness, the PRness, the tools of this world as well. That's what she was training him. And that's why she said to him, put on the cloak of Esav. There are times when you need to use the cloak of Esav in order to get to your goal, to get to the right goal. Stay innocent, stay the way you are, stay spiritual, but sometimes you need to use the cloak of Esav in order to promote a certain goal. Wow. And she even says to him, when he's reluctant about doing it, Yaakov was very reluctant. He says, what if my father curses me? Like, instead of giving me the blessing, what if he realizes and he curses me? She says to him, Alai kilalescha b'ni. The curse is going to be on me. If he curses you, I take the curse for myself. And the question is, how does that make Yaakov feel better? Like, why would that make him feel better? Okay, dad is going to curse me, so you're taking it. Why does that make him feel better? He's still going to be cursed. But what she was saying to him is, there comes a time when we need to be so dedicated to our cause. We need to be so full of self-sacrifice that we're ready to go and we're ready to do it no matter what. This is something that's so important for the Jewish people, that you are the one that gets this blessing. So I'm ready to sacrifice everything. If I get cursed, I'll be cursed. And Yaakov is realizing from his mother that this is the way that he needs to approach it, that even if he's cursed, that's okay. He realizes at that moment, there's things that we need to do that no matter what, we're going to do it and we're going to go ahead with it because we hope that we'll have the victory, but we need to go ahead with it no matter what because this is important for the Jewish people. Oh. And I'm just going to end with one last thing, which is that if we look at the name Yaakov, okay, we have a Yud and then we have Akev. So we have Akev. So we have Yud, which could mean Yad, the hand, right? The hand is on the Akev. In other words, Yaakov was like holding on. He was grabbing the heel of Esav to try to be the one to get out first, to try to be the one to get there, to get the blessings, to be the one. So that's one way of understanding it, is his hand is on, the Akev is on the heel. Another way of understanding it is the Yud, which is the smallest letter, and that represents the point of God, the little point of God. Like Yud is always God's name, right? We talk about Yud as God. So the God's name needs to be in Akev, even in the lowest parts of this world. And that's what the Jewish people are all about. We take the Yud, we take the godliness, and we bring it in to every part of the world, even the lowest parts of the world, the heels of the world. We bring in the godliness, the light, even into the darkness, even into the hardships, the challenges. We bring that point of God, that little Yud of God, into all of reality. And this is what we are facing today in today's times. We're trying to bring that little light, that little point of godliness into this darkness, to fight the lies, to fight the cruelties, to fight the perceptions of the world, which is like, sometimes you just feel like pulling your hair out of it. It's just so ridiculous, like beyond ridiculous. That's our point. And it was the Lubavitcher Rebbe who actually, when Bibi Netanyahu was in the UN, he was the ambassador for Israel in the UN, And the Rebbe encouraged him to stay there, to stay in the UN, not to be the prime minister, but to stay there. But he said to him, you need to bring this as a hall of darkness. This is a home of darkness. Such lies, such darkness. You need to bring the light of truth in it. And it's now Rosh Chodesh Kislev is tonight. Okay. And tonight is Rosh Chodesh Kislev. We welcome the new month of Kislev, which we know is an extremely dark month. I mean, look outside, it gets dark so early. So it's a very dark month, but we also have the holiday of Hanukkah, where we're bringing the light into the darkness, and that is the point of the Jewish people. May we see in the darkness that we are in now, that light of good, the light of truth, the light of Torah, the light of truth. May we prevail and overcome this horrific darkness and difficulty.